Something has come to London, girl. A darkness has entered the city. Oh, you think you've known horror these past few days? You know nothing of what it is to be afraid. I'm Eddie Webb,
And I'm Chris Spivey.
and today we're going to talk about the spooky special of The Irregulars here on Genreless. Hello, and welcome to our Halloween special of Genreless, where we're still doing Sherlock Holmes as well. It's a twofer. It's both a Sherlock Holmes coda and also a Halloween special, and also whatever the hell this show is.
And it's just like Holmes couldn't quit us, is what it was.
Well, I mean, considering we see a couple of limbs of Holmes in this bit, I think he's more or less quit us at this point.
Oh, all right. I don't even know where to start with the show. Eddie,
What?
why did you let me suggest this show for us to watch?
Why did you let me suffer the consequences of my own decisions? So I did warn you that this was not a show that didn't have a lot of Sherlock Holmes in it. But I mean, when you pitched it, it makes a degree of sense for a couple reasons. One, it is actually a horror show. Two, it follows on from the stuff we've been talking about. It is an extension, it is the logical conclusion of the arc I was talking about, where what if Sherlock Holmes was a setting? So now we've reached the absolute conclusion of that, which is now Sherlock Holmes literally is just the setting for this. Um, uh, but also, it was a show I wanted to like, right? And I actually like it better in the second watch than the first watch. I will kind of tip my hand a little bit here. I like it a little better this time around. Partially because I knew what the hell it was trying to do. The initial advertising was really vague. It was just, it's the Baker Street Regulars. I'm like, okay, but that's a huge subsection of possibilities, and this show takes none of those. And it's like, okay, so what if it's the Baker Street Regulars references none of the original? Okay, let's talk about the Baker Street Regulars first.
Yeah, before you get into like the breakdown of that, people are going, the Baker Street Irregulars, who are those? Is that like the dairy or bakery where Sherlock goes to pick up croissants for him and Watson for their date breakfasts? Is that what happens? So it's an array of thoughts people could have.
I will say that where I live in northern London, there actually is a bakery straight up on Baker Street near my house. So I actually do get bread from Baker Street, which is just delightfully
Well, there
known.
should be.
Yes. But no, so the Baker Street Regulars are the street urchins that Holmes used canonically in the stories to get information. And his explanation for them was actually surprisingly cogent for the time, which is that they are able to get access to information and to follow people that other people can't, because higher class people completely ignore them. They're invisible to that class of people. And so Sherlock Holmes frankly exploits them for his own ends. He, gives them money and helps them out, but at the end of the day, Wiggins, which is the leader, comes in the door, gives the information. Holmes or Watson gives the money, and then he fucks off. We never hear from him again. So Holmes does not meaningfully contribute to their life.
How many of them are there in the books?
An undisclosed amount. Wiggins is the only named one, which we'll get into when we talk about the Irregulars in here, because Wiggins does not actually appear, as far as I can tell, in the show. The only named one doesn't actually show up in the book called The Irregulars, or the show called The Irregulars. But there have been a lot of spin-off stuff focusing on the Irregulars. In particular, there was a television show about the Irregulars in the 80s or 90s, which was basically kind of a kid version of Sherlock Holmes mysteries. Let's follow Sherlock Holmes mysteries from the kids' perspective and market that show towards kids.
Was you're gonna like this? If we go back to Ronald Howard, was Billy from the 50s their stand-in for the Irregulars? Do you remember the little kid?
No, since we're here, no, Billy the Page is actually a separate character. He's referenced only in a couple of stories, but basically, um, he's basically someone that Mrs. Hudson employs to help around the house.
Yeah.
And it is implied, and some people may come to the assumption, is that she got tired of Holmes's bullshit, and so hired a kid to go upstairs and send messages to Holmes, so she didn't have to deal with okay, accidentally getting shot or whatever. So
Child
Billy,
endangerment.
right? So Billy is actually a separate character, and the fact that they chose Billy in this show, who's not an irregular, over Wiggins, who is an irregular, is a choice.
Are you saying potentially the people that created this show only have a passing familiarity with Sherlock Holmes? Like maybe they only watched Mr. Holmes and decided to make a Sherlock Holmes show?
I don't think they even watched that. Anyway, so basically, I thought there have been some interesting irregular spin-off ones, including things like because of the time period that the cases take in, the irregulars grow up, and if the only positive male role model you have in your life is Sherlock Holmes, inevitably some of these kids are going to grow up and want to become detectives. And
I think Watson is a better role model than Holmes. Why don't they want to grow up to become doctors?
that's a valid question. Probably because Holmes is the one that gives them money and a purpose.
I don't
Okay,
remember
so
well enough to debate that with you right now, but I'm thinking that's going to be a point we come back to after I reread some stuff.
this is a lot of inference, right? But Watson doesn't even know the Irregulars exist, right? The Irregulars are something that Holmes created beforehand, and specifically, he names them after the police irregulars, which are the police officers who don't have regular hours, and is kind of a precursor to plainclothes police officers we have nowadays. And so that was kind of his joke, is that these are my kind of plainclothes detectives. Because much like the irregulars, people don't realize they're police officers and therefore might do or say things around them that would incriminate them that they wouldn't otherwise do. So Holmes is the first point of contact for at least Wiggins. And Wiggins, again, is the only character we see. Now, some of the spin-off fiction, yes, some of the irregulars, to various degrees of inclusivity, depending on the time period they're written in. Some of them do decide they want to follow medical production, and some of them have more of the emotional intelligence of Watson than the rigor of Watson. There's even some one spinoff I can think of where Wiggins becomes a bad guy because of how Holmes treated him, which is interesting.
So he's essentially Holmes' Jason Todd.
Yeah, honestly. That's a good analogy. Chris, who's Jason Todd?
Jason Todd is the second Robin that you fans killed off, who then got brought back to life by Ra's al Ghul, who is a person that runs a cult with a Lazarus Pit, and a Lazarus Pit is something that brings people back to life and makes them a little evil. And then Jason Todd becomes a Red Hood and plagues Batman for a while before he now became like an anti-hero, but I think he's a full-blown hero again, or he's working with the Suicide Squad. It depends on when you pick up the DC comics right now.
Right.
Or if you want to go with James Gunn's latest promotion for the movie, it's going to be Dick Grayson and Jason Todd, I think, is two Robins working together in like an animated series or something. No Batman, just two Robins.
Just two
Robin
Robins.
ended up. Yeah.
Two Robins, one cup.
I was going to say one cow, but each to their own.
I will say Dick Grayson technically was Batman for a while, but anyway.
But this isn't Dick Grayson's Batman, though, in this thing. It's both of them as Robin. Which makes no sense.
Less interested in that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so going back to how much
we've digressed into Batman now, which makes sense because they're both detectives. Dick Grayson Batman is the best Batman, in my opinion.
Honestly, I can't argue that.
All right,
Definitely the most
we're
emotionally
done then.
intelligent. Yeah. Side note, before we were started recording, I was talking about how much I love Batman Beyond. Part of the reason why I'm in this headspace. And the comics at a certain point in time take up after the end of the cartoon series and continue the story. And so there's actually a pretty interesting arc where Dick Grayson starts to teach the Batman Beyonds of the future how to be Batman. And it's interesting because he has a very different style than Bruce Wayne does. And there's some interesting kind of tension about their different styles and whatnot. And Dick Grayson occasionally pointing out, I was also Batman at one time. I was you at one point in time. I took over the mantle at one point in time, and I remember how much that screwed with my head. Make sure you don't go down that same road. So yeah, no, Dick Grayson, best Batman. Anyway, to this show's credits, and I use that term extremely loosely, it was pitched from the beginning as a reimagining. It was not even attempting to be faithful. In fact, the original premise was, what if Sherlock Holmes is a drug addict and the kids solve the case while he takes the credit? That was actually the pitch for the original show.
And I'm not a fan of that premise.
Yeah. And the thing is that the show does nothing. The advertising up to the show does not let you know that is the premise, and you don't realize that's the premise until well into several episodes of the show. It's about the time we stop watching this that actually starts to establish itself as the premise of the show. So the first time I watched it, it felt very bait and switchy, right? It's like it's like Garfield without Garfield, right? You know, Sherlock Holmes without Sherlock Holmes in it.
Which I love. I love that part of it. Because it goes back somewhat, I guess, somewhat to my love Enola Holmes compared to yours. I like that Holmes is a secondary character in Enola Holmes. Here, Holmes is, as you already said, purely setting. Like set dressing is Holmes, and some of Holmes's sidekicks are part of the actual show itself, and they're given roles. The reimagined roles they put them in, I'm not necessarily loving all of those, but I like the concept behind it.
Right. And if that was clear at the beginning, I think I would have liked the show on my first watch better. Now that I knew going in what that was the premise, I did like it better on the second watch because I knew that was what I was getting.
I think part of this also goes back to, if I'm right, you're not a big watcher of trailers. Trailers are not your thing.
Yes, and when I do, I usually get disappointed. So this is another reason why I was disappointed.
And I saw the trailers for the show, and I knew that Sherlock was not an important part of the show, so I wasn't expecting Sherlock.
I mean, that's fair. I only watched one trailer, and it was very much the new Sherlock Holmes show from Netflix. Was kind of how it was pitched.
Because watching anything where they're going to have Sherlock Holmes, they would normally either start you on Sherlock, or Sherlock would show up somewhere in the trailer as a predominant part of it to sort of let you know, this is our Sherlock. And in this, I saw like kids, shady looking Watson, kids.
Right. But
I don't
again,
even think they named Watson in the trailers either.
Huh. I think it was just the doctor in the trailer I watched, which brings up all sorts of different questions. But
yeah.
But more, I guess, interestingly, to give it some credit, it does also position the what if all of the supporting cast outside of the Irregulars were actually evil? Because all of the adults, at least in the few we've watched, are generally assholes. And again, the first time I watched it, that rubbed me the wrong way. Much like we talked before, it's like, if you're going to use characters wildly different ways, why even name them these characters? The second time around, when I came to it as the Sherlock Holmes canon is the setting for this, and we're looking at explicit reimagination, I could see more of it being, this is what kids think of adults. We're looking at this, much like with Enola Holmes talked about, we're watching it through Enola's viewpoint, and so the characters are, your argument was characters are changed and deformed because this is from a young girl's viewpoint. So I watched it with that in mind, and it did help me to like it better, because it's if you are kids living on the streets naturally going to be highly mistrustful of adults, particularly adults in positions of authority.
Yeah. And for me, I didn't have that at all because when I started it, I had seen how it was being portrayed. I took that as how the kids are interacting with them, and also from the very premise that, and we can talk about the episode in a minute if we're getting this much into it, but how they're brought in because of their lower status compared to everyone else. So not only are they kids trying to engage in that world, but you also have everyone looking down on them because they live on the streets. So you've already got multiple layers that are separating them. And so how they treat them is never going to be as equal or pairs or kind. That's just not the time for them to do it in. And if you look at how they treat, I'm only going to give this one little spoiler. Leopold is different than how they treat the other kids. Because
Right.
people recognize something about him that makes him not feel like he's of the same societal class as they are, and he's treated differently.
Right. And that was another point that, again, once I rewatched it, knowing where I was going to go initially helped me, is because this is also a show, and I think one of the first shows we've watched, Revolving Homes, that has a very sharp critique of class in Victorian society. The only thing off the top of my head that comes close is the Moriarty the Patriot manga, which I've mentioned a few times, because the Moriarty, spoilers for the first 50 pages of the manga, I suppose, but Moriarty actually starts off as a abandoned, street kid who falls into the role of Moriarty and co-ops class specifically to conduct class warfare. That's the whole premise of the whole show, is that basically he's eat the rich, but in Victorian times with Moriarty as lead. Um, so uh, coming into this, hey, it's a horror show, but also, by the way, it's the horror of being lower class in Victorian society. So yes, it's a supernatural show, but also it's meant to be a very obvious metaphor. You can't have Holmes and Watson and these other characters who are all at best middle class and more likely upper class. They just can't be sympathetic immediately.
Yeah. And so to tip my hand, I did not hate this show.
This show was perfectly adequate.
we always laugh about it, but watchable is a solid standard that most shows
Yeah,
should strive for and few hit.
yeah, and I mean, let's just. So that sounds like we're in agreement on this, but so anyway, like the show is definitely watchable. At no point was I bored watching any of this.
No, I'm gonna have quibbles as we go throughout about
Absolutely,
stuff.
absolutely.
But if I think about the show, it is essentially, wow, almost like Buffy meets the Faculty. Like, what if Giles from Buffy was actually evil? Which,
Yeah,
Giles from Buffy is kind of evil at the start, but it's that because you have for a while like the weekly monster trend that sort of pops up that we saw frequently in television from the 90s and 2000s with like Smallville, with Buffy, or with all the other shows. You'd have creature pop up, fight the creature, move plot in centimeter, and there was that for a bit.
now that you mention that, it's interesting because in a lot of ways, it's clicked in my head. This is kind of a spiritual successor to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right?
Yeah.
It is a modern take on kids fight the supernatural. It is very Monsters of the Week, but because it's modern television, there has to be an ongoing season-long plot. That's how television is made now. But it is very much, here's the monster of the week that the scrappy kids are going to have to deal with.
And I say specifically Buffy because you have one girl with superpowers,
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by her entourage.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one kid who doesn't quite fit in with the group is trying to find his way into the group that already exists. Yeah. No. The more we talk about it, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I definitely see this as, I could see a lineage from Buffy to here, which arguably goes from Scooby Doo to here. But yes.
Yeah. Well, I think in Scooby Doo would be the Buffy because Scooby was the one with superpowers because he's basically a talking fucking dog.
A group of kids, one of which is unusual in some way, fight monsters. That is an established trope.
Although watching this reminded me of a lot of shows from the early 2000s, the BBC, like The Fades and some other things. I'm trying to remember them all now. They really only ran for like one season. There's about 6 episodes where they had supernatural stuff and people were encountering and dealing with it, like the vibe of it, almost like the shooting, how it was filmed, all lined up with those shows from that time period. If I
Yeah,
could remember the names of them, I would delve into them because it almost makes me want to do a small run just talking about those and like comparing them.
yeah, no, totally. And I agree with you. Obviously, it's a Netflix show that was produced in the UK, but there are strong BBC vibes. I mean, there's even a bit of, in the visual language perspective, modern Doctor Who in this too, right?
Well, Watson wears that trench coat like Tenant wore his.
Right? Yeah, exactly. The hero coat, as it's called, is definitely present. Um, and some of the banter and how the banter is used has echoes of Torchwood. So I mean, there's definitely those influences here. I just wish I loved the show more, frankly.
All right, before we actually get into the summary, what is it about the show that put you off so much? Because I said it's watchable. I enjoyed it enough that I started watching the 4th episode.
Okay.
So, what is it
Uh,
about the show that has made you the lower part of watchable?
um, honestly, and it's something I recognize I may change my mind on as we talk it through. Um, I think it's because it's a little unclear what the show's trying to do, right? Like, what does the injection of the Holmes canon actually adding to this? And that's unclear because the characters it introduces, it seems like we're supposed to make certain assumptions based on what we know of them, and then we subvert those assumptions. And that twist works fine the first time, but it keeps happening. So, like, by the time it happens the third time in 3 episodes, it's the okay, so nothing I assume about the Holmes canon is valid. So it's a bit of, so why are we here? And because it spends so much time in those 3 episodes really nailing down, hey, you don't, what you think you know about the Holmes canon, you don't really know about the Holmes canon, nothing else seems to start. But granted, because this is done by Netflix, it is designed to be watched more or less all at once, and that is not how I consume television. Something else we talked about recording is that I don't sit and just watch a whole show front to back. I tend to watch it in small chunks.
Yeah, you're
So
an anti-binger.
yes, I am, and I don't binge well. So I entirely believe that this is something that probably is explained in future episodes we haven't gotten to, or at least I haven't gotten to. So I recognize that that may be part of the problem. It may be a slow burn. It may just be a case of like, okay, you have to watch half of it before it clicks into place. That is, again, also how television is made today, to its detriment, in my case. So it may be something that does get solved. But I felt like for a while this was kind of two shows.
Yeah,
Here's the plucky kids, and then here's the horrible horror show. And with a couple of exceptions, which I'll go into, some of the kids don't seem to understand that they're in a horror show. B gets it. B understands what show she's in, right? The other kids don't quite seem to know what show they're in, and I don't know. I enjoyed watching them. I enjoy the kids, honestly. But there are
see,
times where it's like, for me, it's like I would actually don't care about the supernatural stuff or the Sherlock Holmes stuff. I just want to see the kid dynamic play out.
you've given me a lot of things coming on. I will start by saying I also think Spike understands he's in a horror show, and I have problems with the Spike character, but understands they're in a horror show. The thing is, though, if you're it's supposed to be an 8 episode series. Hopefully, they want it more seasons. So you have to build up. This like build up to characters eventually coming along that concept. It does do the thing that I hate that I mentioned that I think Elementary did, which is saying it's a Sherlock show to bring in people that are Sherlock fans to then tell
Right.
you a different story. This does that completely, which I am more okay with this before you asked than I am with Elementary because it's not focused on Sherlock. It boils down to like this is deconstructing the world of Sherlock without really having Sherlock be a part of their story so far. Other things, if you're going to deconstruct Sherlock, you need to be more true to the canon, which I think you're actually I think part of the reason that you may have bounced off the show somewhat is how it treats the canon itself. I could be
Sure, sure.
misreading that, but I feel that's part of it.
Uh, yeah. I mean, for again, to kind of reiterate, I did like it better, and I think I liked it better because I went just watching it not expecting a Sherlock Holmes show. Because you're right, it's a Sherlock Holmes show. Okay, I'll watch it because it's a Sherlock Holmes show. Oh, it's not really. And you have a valid point. That's actually how I first approached Elementary. Because like there's Sherlock, the original Sherlock, and Elementary. The original Sherlock starts to be a relatively faithful Sherlock Holmes adaptation, and then goes way bad, i.e., wrong directions. Whereas Elementary starts off not really a Sherlock Holmes show and slowly grows into one. Um, so, but for the Irregulars, it's like a Sherlock Holmes show, but it's not really. When I came into it going, like you said, it's a deconstruction. In fact, it's such deconstruction that it has deconstructed Holmes entirely. He is now reduced from the narrative. Um, the it, from that perspective, it's actually a very daring show because I jokingly made the Garfield without Garfield reference, but on some level it is. What happens if you take Sherlock Holmes out of the story entirely? What are you left with? And what is that? How does that shape and change things? And as a horror premise, the one hero that you expect to come and save the day can't do that. So now what do you do? Is an interesting premise. So for me, I think it takes a while to get there, but I'm willing to accept that this is just I'm bouncing off the way the show was designed, and it's not for me in that regard. But I'm not bouncing off it since I hate it. Like I said, I mean,
No,
I think if I'm with you, I almost kept watching. I didn't because I so much other stuff I have to watch for this goddamn podcast. But,
is
but
the next recording week is going to be a busy one for us? Is that what you're trying to tell our listeners?
I am implying that there's a backlog that I have to get through. But also, I do have I have some dog watching I have to do in the near future, so I may end up just watching the rest of this. So I mean, like it's gripped me a bit more in that regard. Um,
That's
but
why I didn't say that you didn't like it. I said you're on the lower
right,
part of
exactly right.
watchable.
Yeah,
I think. All right, we're going to trademark our watchable banner, but we're going to have a watchable banner that we start putting out, and like it will move our little head figures up and down on the scale.
right. Uh, but I mean, what's interesting for me is that to kind of get into the actual show proper, um, if you look at it as it's a horror show for kids, it's not, right? It's not actually a horror show for kids. But I mentioned Torchwood, and then kind of as an anecdote, but it's been boiling in the back of my head. I think it's kind of the same way of like it's something that's written with kids in mind, but then they try to age it up at some point in time during the production process. And
Yeah,
that's kind of the vibe I'm getting out of all of this. Is that I think if they had pitched it a little bit lower to something closer to Enola Holmes, but still a horror show, I think for me it would have landed a lot better. Or go the opposite route, which is just clearly into the horror, make it a proper horror show. And that's, I mean, I think some also is a tone, but I can also see an argument for, like you said, maybe the characters are growing into that realization. That's the horror, is that B is the one who gets what's going on, but the other kids slowly come to that realization over time, and that changes and deforms their dynamic. I could see that being a very possible arc. So yeah, no. In terms of the, let's say, 1 to 5 watchable scale, I'm certainly
we
around the
go
one to
we go
two.
1 to 10 here because that's a
Okay,
bigger gradation than 1 to 5.
so I'm probably around. On the one that's I'm probably around 2 to 3, in the sense of if it's on, or if I had nothing else going on, I probably would watch it and enjoy it. But also, you can see why I didn't want to put this in the Sherlock Holmes run, because it's not even relevant. Although it's in a way, because of the accident timing, I'm glad we're doing this now, because it is kind of the logical extension of the deconstruction thing. We've now completely deconstructed ourselves out of not only the Sherlock Holmes run, but also Sherlock Holmes himself. So on a purely meta narrative, I'm really enjoying the placement of this, but yeah.
Do you know any of the cast from anywhere before you move on to like breaking down the episodes themselves?
I want to say I do, but I couldn't actually place them. I feel like maybe one of them had been in a class, although I hadn't watched a ton of class.
Oh, I never watched it. Class is that for anyone that's curious. I think it's a Doctor Who / Sarah Jane spinoff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I never watched it.
I watched like half of one episode. Um, I think another one might have been in. I don't know. This is the problem is that there are a lot of British actors I recognize, and it's like I know you're a British actor. I've seen him before. No idea where.
The only one I recognized, and it took me a beat, was Watson.
What was he in?
Because Watson is in The Witcher.
Is he?
I want to say it was like maybe season 1 and maybe some of season 3. He
Huh.
was, I'm trying to remember specifically. He was either, wasn't a fellow Witcher. I want to say he was Yennefer's other love interest. And it's because he had that weird ass little Watson mustache and was throwing me off. It's like, I recognize your face, but that mustache is so distracting. It's like that hat from Get Out. It just like keeps drawing my attention.
By the way, if you want to hear our conversation about Get Out, you're not part of the Patreon, please subscribe now, and you can hear us talk about Get Out and why my favorite character is my favorite character in Get Out.
All right, let's get into your favorite Sherlock Holmes adaptation right now, Eddie. I don't know what
Oh,
that's going
or
to be, but it won't
Elementary.
be
Okay, let's
this.
start with Elementary right now. Okay, Chapter 1, Unkindness in London. In Victorian London, half-sisters Bee and Jessie live with their friends Billy and Spike in the cellar of a pub called the Duck and Quiver. Jessie has nightmares about being trapped in a dark cave with a threatening creature. In the morning, Bee and Jessie acknowledge Bee's 17th birthday before noticing Spike and Billy are missing. Bee goes to search for them. As she steps out, she spots a man watching her from 221B Baker Street. Bee finds the boys at an underground boxing ring where Billy is preparing for a match, and she forces him to leave. In the royal palace across the city, Prince Leopold, the youngest son of Queen Victoria, is also celebrating his birthday. Because his hemophilia leaves him vulnerable to injury, he is rarely allowed outside, but as it's his birthday, he asks for permission to leave the palace to see the city. The request is granted, but he's accompanied by his servant Daimler and forced to stay in the carriage. And we'll stop there. So we have introduced all of the kids.
And how'd you like that?
I thought it was a very efficient way of introducing 5 characters, which is actually a huge compliment because for big cast shows, it's sometimes really hard to give 5 characters distinctive personalities without making them seem like cutouts, and all of these characters feel real.
Yeah.
Leopold's probably the most flat, but given his circumstance, that makes sense. So I don't see that as a problem.
Because I thought their interpretation of Jessie so far was the most flat when I first saw it. Sort of like just the weird sister is almost like the quick archetype they slot her into.
I guess I can see that. For me, the invisible presence scene does a lot of help with Jessie.
Okay.
Because immediately you see that she cares deeply about Bee, and she's positioned as the lighthearted counterbalance to Bee's more serious nature. Now, the show will immediately forget this characterization. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at this moment, it seems like they have a lot of interesting dynamics.
Could you tell, and I don't know if you agree, within the first 3 minutes of the show that Bee is our protagonist and everyone else are basically her Scooby Gang?
Yes.
Okay.
Bee is very obviously the leader of this group, which again doesn't bother me that they have reimagined this, but Wiggins is kind of the only character we know, and Bee could be Bee Wiggins. Wiggins is a surname, so Bee could be Bee Wiggins. That's fine. And maybe she is. I don't know. We've actually never heard her surname in the 3 episodes we watched. For all I know, she may actually be Wiggins.
You seem to be very, very attached to Wiggins. I don't remember Wiggins at all from the literature, so I could give. I don't know who he is. Um,
Wiggins does not have a character, right? Wiggins is simply the name that Sherlock Holmes barks at the random kid that comes in to give plot information and leaves, right? So it's not like there's a character there, but
so
it's much like Lestrade. It is the name that everyone knows about this part.
in fact, Holmes could have just been being classist and not even know the kid's name and just called him Wiggins off the cuff. Oh,
That is
Wiggins.
actually a valid interpretation. It's you're Wiggins now. No, I'm John. No, you're Wiggins.
Yeah. So that, like, in my head canon, that's now what it is. So it is in fact B from the books, and Holmes just calls B Wiggins.
You know what? That's entirely fair. Actually, I'll accept that.
Before we, joking aside, one of the things that, this is a slight spoiler, but is sort of relevant to this. Maybe what it is that, geez, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but if you at this point, I'm thinking that potentially this is like the second iteration of the Irregulars that they form, and the Wiggins character may have been in the first one that you were thinking about. Given that we
Mm,
know the amount of time that goes by and the place where they are in the timeline. Because one of the
you
things
know
that
what? Maybe.
didn't bother me as much about the deconstruction of Holmes is that they established that Holmes and Watson have been doing stuff and they are past their peak, we'll say.
Right. I want to touch on it when we get there a little closer to it, because I have thoughts about this and also why I don't like Cthulhu mashups with Holmes. But you have a valid point. This might be a new group of irregulars.
Eddie, who's Prince Leopold? I mean, really, in real history, who's Leopold? Do you know anything about him?
I actually don't, except for the fact he probably should be German, and he's not. But you know, he's raised in England, so I guess it's okay. But otherwise, no, I don't know much about actually the real world Leopold.
I don't either. I was curious if you knew more than I did. So, but
No,
it was,
no,
I think it's an interesting addition, though, to add in a noble in there acting as a peasant.
right. I'm actually just really quickly Googling, and I don't have. I keep eating Leopold's Australia, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Although, for a moment, before we really got into more of it, at that opening scene with Leopold staring longingly at those people out in the gardens, I originally was thinking, because I guess I'm a slash fiction writer now, is that Leopold was eyeing that guy that was out there kissing that girl, and he was trapped in his room because his parents didn't want him to go off and have a happy, successful life. So I was half right.
I mean, honestly, that's not invalid either. Because like again, the first time I watched it, uh, uh, I thought Leopold was going to be the villain. It's the I can't have this, so I'm going to do horrible things because this is a critique of class structure. I saw it right away. This is a critique of class structure, and so the Leopold's going to be the eventual villain. And then pretty quickly I realized it was going a different direction. But yeah, I saw it longingly. It's like, oh, these people are having fun, and I'm going to murder them all. That's kind of my initial take for it.
Okay, Billy and Spike. What are your initial thoughts of these two characters?
Um, so I like Spike and Billy, and I stand by my statement that in this short space they're given a little more depth than their obvious stereotypes, but they're still obvious stereotypes, right? Uh, the tough, serious kid who's gonna pick fights, and the wisecracking comic relief who happens to be a person of color who is the mediator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that pretty much sums up my thoughts on them.
Um, I I do like the commentary, however, of Billy is going to get into what are presumably illegal, but maybe not, fights because they need money, which is another interesting layer of the critique they're building up.
And it's almost an homage back to the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes in a fighting ring. So you get that little touchstone there too. And I don't know if we mentioned it, but it is also nice that B is a person of color, and how
Yes.
this show is already more diverse than every other single iteration of Sherlock Holmes we've watched over the past 87 years we've been doing this.
Yeah. No. I mean, yes,
In 5 minutes.
there are two white men in the main cast, white boys. I mean, depending on how you define the age here, but of the protagonists. There are two white male presenting characters, but neither of them are remotely protagonist material for very different reasons. So yeah, no, and that's why when I first watched it, I was like, I really want to support the show because they're casting diversely and doing interesting stuff, but they still found time to engage at least one black stereotype, and it's just like, it's not a great start.
I'm gonna have some other comments on that, but also even at the party we have Leopold. There's like nobility out there who are people of color too. Like
Yes,
right
100%.
away, they've already added all that in under 5 minutes, more diverse than every other single adaptation we've seen to date.
Yeah, yeah, and uh, I'm just gonna leave the gaping hole of certain elements of fandom who had problems with that. Just at this point, just take it as right for these kinds of shows and move on. But yes, that also happened during all of this.
And I want to say it did it how I like it to be done. It was utterly effortless. It wasn't even a thing. They didn't talk about it.
Yeah, yeah,
They had them there existing, which if I think if the show was more aware of what it was doing, it would have then created complications for those characters later on during the multiple episodes that was not related to class. That is what's missing.
right. I mean, so to kind of counterbalance, like Enola Holmes had far less of this, but when it did do it, there was some critique and commentary on that fact. This
Correct.
show had a lot more of it, and it was, I hate to use this term, but it is one that was probably used in the development of the show Colorblind, which is that we're just going to cast people because they're good at the job, which is not exactly what's happening here. But the fact that the majority of the lower class characters were people of color was at least at a fundamental level a certain amount of critique, which then they blow out of the water because of Watson, but whatever.
But see, that's not even quite it either, because I don't want to give spoilers to other episodes, but the people of color are also in other positions that are not.
Right. That's my point. Is like they blow out of the water pretty soon afterwards. And there's a lot of that in this show, right? Is that here's a cool premise, but then you don't do anything with it. Here's a cool premise, but then you go a different direction. There's very kind of design by committee vibe around some of this.
And it has a lot of, I'm just going to say it now, then I won't have to harp on it again, wasted potential. All right, that's my last bit.
All right.
Wasted potential.
In the cellar of the Duck and Quiver, B confronts Billy about his fighting. Billy insists that they need the money to pay for a doctor for Jesse and to pay back their landlord, Mrs. Hudson, who is threatening to kick them out. B becomes upset when Spike suggests they consider the workhouse. During the conversation, Jessie slips out of the cellar and wanders into the street in a trance. She sees a sinister figure in an alley and runs in front of Leo's carriage, with B saving her at the last minute. Daimler gets out and scolds B, but she stands up to him, impressing Leo. The carriage drives off as B comforts Jessie. Concerned about her sister, B meets with her mother's friend, Sister Anna, at her mother's grave. B points out that her mother, Alice, had strange dreams also before her death, but Sister Anna dismisses the thought. As she arrives, B spots the same man from 221B watching her and runs away. He chases her, finally catching her in an alley, and offers to pay her for some work. The man introduces himself as a doctor and reveals that he and his partner run an independent detective agency. He explains that for the current case, they require the help of someone familiar with the disreputable parts of London. 4 newborn babies have recently disappeared, with the most recent kidnapping happening in the previous night from an upstairs room in a locked window. Neither the older sister, who shared the room with the infants, nor their mother downstairs saw anyone. The only clue was a single raven feather found beneath the crib. The doctor explains that the sister, Susan Shipley, has now also disappeared, and offers to pay B if she can locate the girl, and B agrees. Um, I liked the workhouse argument, which again is a cool thread in this episode that again gets forgotten in the previous next episodes. Which now that I say that, I think another part of the overall frustration I have with this is that it feels like it was written to be more episodic, and then kind of over time got rewritten to be something more continuity heavy. Because I'm actually wondering if this is a show maybe just sitting around in a drawer for 15 years and then got picked up and reimagined later, because there is a lot of this that I liked in the kind of episodic television vibe. Like each episode has a monster of the week, for lack of a better term. But also the downsides of episodic thing, which is that we're gonna have character traits that don't play out over other episodes.
But see, the thing is, though, the workhouse does crop up at least in the 3 episodes we watched. They mentioned the workhouse as a threat, at least in each one. So that is a reoccurring theme, and the fact that they're always scrapped for cash is a recurring thing.
Well, the strap for cash definitely is a real thing. The workhouse thing, and maybe I'm overanalyzing it, it's entirely possible, but it felt a little more shoehorned in, whereas this was actually a proper conversation about it. But arguably, you don't need to have that conversation again if you already had it once. So maybe that's a point for me to deal with.
Because I want to say in episode 2 it's used as a threat. In episode 3 it's just referenced by someone talking about their situation. So
Right.
it's there. I think I have a better memory of that simply because I
Maybe.
literally watched almost all these yesterday.
Maybe that may be the case. And a throwaway reference to Mrs. Hudson, which is setting up the here's a name you might recognize. So now she's a landlord that has multiple properties, apparently. Sure.
I'm gonna say it right here now, though. I love the name of the bar, Duck and Quiver. I don't know why I
Yes.
like it, but I love it. I love it.
Yes, it is very authentic. But then Jesse immediately slides in a plot device. It's the and now she's got dreams and she's gonna walk in front of a carriage and she's sick. And like it's fine, having a sickly character that other people are taking care of and that being interesting sort of tension was fine. But nothing about the original introduction implied that too much. There's a couple references to her being sick, but she didn't act like she was sick, right?
The thing is, though, she's not sick. It's B is projecting a sickness onto her because we get like her nightmare at the start is how we kick it off with, and B is concerned about her nightmares. They reference like the mother having weird dreams too. So
Right.
it's less the character being sick; it's more of how she's being treated by the other people around her.
That's true. And I mean, it did seem like there was a certain amount of infantilization. Is that maybe what I'm thinking? Of like, Jesse can't be trusted to handle this and her fighting against it. I guess the issue that I had at the time was because the fight was very clearly, I need to fight to get money so we can get Jesse better, which implied a more physical illness. Um, I suppose they may have thought it was a mental illness.
Well,
Uh,
they're talking about the workhouse and if their mother had strange dreams, they've called them, which had been like a reoccurring part of their life for a while until the mother passed away. And if she's
right.
talking to like a nun in the graveyard about her mother's weird dreams, like that. So I give the show some credit, but then also at the same time, I'm like, stop hitting me in the face with a brick. Like I could get your plot, but I don't need a brick in the face to tell me the plot.
Well, right, but I mean that's the thing is that it's so overt that sometimes it gets, I'm reeling from the obvious thing, and the subtle stuff's not lining up with the obvious thing, and that's where I'm getting confused, right?
It is
It's
totally
the
inconsistent.
There you go. That's the way of putting it. It's hitting me hard with what they want you to come away with, which is that Jessie is sick and she has visions and her mother has visions, and that's terrible. And it's like, okay, cool, great, but that's not lining up with some other pieces of the stories you've also put into place. And so the subtle stuff and the obvious stuff are not meshing for me.
I guess I watched a lot of sort of the Monster of the Week shows, so I'm giving the show more kudos. I'm also giving it more time to find itself because I like the fact that there's an incredibly diverse cast. And
Right.
that means I understand the struggle it would have taken to get this show made with the people they've chosen to do it compared to other shows where it would have been like, whatever. Let's give Supernatural 15 seasons. The first 3 seasons can suck. They'll eventually find their footing.
No, no, totally fair. And I mean, I think we've already kind of talked about as our lead in is like as like we're really arguing over small gradations of enjoyment here.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my frustration comes from what you talked before is there's wasted potential here, and so a lot of my nitpicking is really kind of if these pieces had slotted together a little better, it would have been a fantastic show. But you're absolutely right, and I read my point. I think a lot of this is designed by committee. I think there probably was a lot more studio meddling in this, and that probably watered down some of these issues.
And that's probably why it only got one season.
Yeah.
I will say that B pushing Delmer in the street did not go down the way I thought it would.
Oh, really?
And in anything, like, given the fact that they should have had at least some guard, some of the other people would have done something. I don't
Yeah.
see a lower class person like that pushing a noble-esque person and getting to just walk away like nothing happened.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I loved it, but I don't see it happening even in like the world they've created here for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument is that Leopold kind of pushed really hard for this, and the server didn't want anyone to know, and so they kind of went off by their own. But I'm having to fill in the gaps on that.
Because even if I go and I just think of the musical Into the Woods, which, well, like I get to make a musical reference.
Wow.
Into the Woods, one of the which there is the King Stewart gets accosted by some poor people, and even in the musical, whacks him on the head for talking back to them. Kills the woman, but still,
Right.
like instantly, like class divide, you don't talk to me like that. Smack. Done.
Right, and that's, I think, another kind of totally inconsistent things is that it's meant to be a critique of class, but it doesn't actually lean hard enough into that.
Yeah. So,
Well, actually leads me to Dr. Watson, since we see him here now.
where does this Watson rank in your scale of Watsons? Given the fact it's also a Watson being viewed to the kids' eyes.
Right. I like him as Watson. Don't get me wrong. If for no other reason than by the structure of the show, Watson has to become a more central character, and so I'm always predisposed towards Watson's acting more like a lead, and because of the way the show is structured, Watson has to be a lead. And him in the mentor role, I really dig. I really dig the concept. So if you going from he comes across as vaguely and later on explicitly threatening because we're looking at it from the kid's perspective, I rank him actually pretty high in my Watsons.
Okay.
His military and medical professions don't really come into play, but again, if we're looking at it from the kids' perspectives, they wouldn't know that about him, and certainly his approach to the supernatural does have the whiff of militarism around it, so I think that kind of passes.
Okay. He's in the middle for my Watsons for me, because one of the things is I love the fact that they made Watson a person of color.
Right.
But then I look at it even from the kid's perspective, and the kids don't trust him and think he's an evil force. And part of me wants to know if the reason they turned Watson into a black man at that point in time is they believed that it's easier for the audience to then be with the kid's side and view Watson in a negative light.
That's a valid and disturbing point.
Because I see that a lot in media.
Right. Yeah, I mean you're right. I mean that's a point that I had not actually considered, and it's a very valid and frankly disgusting possibility because it's very real. Disgusting because it's very real. But it's also frustrating because you're right. This is a Black Watson, and if anything, for me, it had the opposite effect. I wanted to trust him more, right? And I don't know how much that is me going because I want to support this kind of inclusive casting, and that's a pretty meta reason for me to want to trust this character more.
Yeah. So that was like when I saw it and how it was all going down. That was my first thought.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The mystery itself, missing babies.
This is another point where the first time around I was like, "What?" And then the second time around I got on board because like, okay, it's the monster of the week. The plot it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter. Um, so I gave it more pass this time, but the first time around, I was like, I need disreputable people to investigate parts of London. So I want you to go to four reasonably well-off families in different parts of London and ask them about their missing children. Wouldn't, I don't know, a medical professional have a better chance of answering that information?
That is my thought. And then though I'm also thinking that possibly it's because Watson is taking care of Holmes in some capacity and doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. That is
Which
what
is
I give the show.
which is on second watch probably the more likely reason is that the reason he's giving is just a straight up fucking lie. Um, Given the, let's say, more malicious tone that the show is going for with Watson, another credible answer is I need some disposable people to look at this thing because people are dying,
Mm-hmm.
and you're disposable, so you can go look into this. And I give the show credit to realize there's probably a middle ground happening here. It's probably more I I need someone to look into this. I care enough about the situation that I want someone to investigate it. It can't be me. It can't be Holmes. I don't trust Mycroft, so I need to get an outside source. This is the route we're going to go. Um, uh, so I like the fact that it's a little vague, but the first time around, it's such a non sequitur. You have to realize Watson is lying during some portion of this conversation, and that's the only way this
Mm-hmm.
thing makes sense.
Much like the Doctor.
Right? Yeah.
Given though that I think in the episode they do point out why Watson chose him, so that was
Right.
a nice that they did that right away to get rid of that lingering piece of it. But for right here, that is like the initial thought.
Right. Right. Anything else
And
about this section? Okay.
I will say that whoever wrote this, I believe, is a Call of Cthulhu fan because they are in London. They use the last name Shipley. And for anyone that's played the campaign, Master of Thotep, there is a Shipley in that campaign in London that has a mystery associated with it. That's a horror. Just saying. I see you, writer.
Would not surprise me. I mean, hell, what is it? The Expanse came out of a Traveler campaign, so it wouldn't surprise me at least.
I'm just letting that player know that I see them.
All right. Anything else?
No, it's it.
Spike is quickly able to locate Susan. She admits that on the night of the kidnapping, she had snuck out to meet her boyfriend and left the window open. She also reveals that she had heard raven noises outside her window for several nights in a row. However, at that moment, the group is attacked by a swarm of ravens. B, Spike, and Billy manage to escape, but the ravens kill Susan by pecking out her eyes. B returns to 221B, where she reports that Susan was killed and tries to end her involvement with the case. However, the doctor refuses to pay her until she brings him more information about the crimes. When he briefly steps into another room, B notices another man laid out on the couch in the back. Doctor quickly returns to a list of the other missing babies, which B angrily takes and storms out. So we'll kind of stop there because it was short, but actually covered a lot of ground.
I like ravens. I love a swarm of ravens. Or I'm more of a fan, I guess, of Murder of Crows. But each to their own. Each to their own bird of choice.
Well, I mean, the fact that it's ravens actually becomes relevant in the next chunk we're about to cover. But again, kind of totally inconsistent. Like right before we got to this, I was like, okay, this is a young adult horror show. Cool, great. And then someone gets her eyes pecked out. I'm like, this is not for kids at all.
No, I wouldn't show my kid this show. All right. Now we're at the point where my biggest problem with this mystery teen horror show is.
Right.
And I underline the word mystery because how quickly they resolve cases seems to be through sheer luck.
Yes.
They give some like wordplay about I talked to a person who talked to a person who knew a person, but it's mystery is just there for also setting.
Right, which it's the okay, so why have you used Sherlock Holmes? It's not is it for the character? No, the character's been sidelined. Is it for supporting cast? Supporting cast has been reimagined. So it's because you want to do a Victorian mystery setting. Well, now the mystery, as you just pointed out, is largely bunkus. So why are we using Sherlock Holmes? And that the answer is because of the mythos of Sherlock Holmes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lowercase m, not capital M for Cthulhu. This brought that up.
It goes back to what you were originally saying a couple episodes ago, where you can drop Sherlock Holmes is so well known that you can just like drop a name of something and people have some reference point for it. They can pull in facts.
Right, right, and that's what's happening here. Which, and again, once I realized that, that's fine. Um, uh, but yeah, it's the here's the mystery. Go find this girl. Oh, she's dead. Okay.
She gave some important information, some exposition, if you will.
Right. And again, what's fascinating is in we've really established our four characters. Leo hasn't joined the team yet, so right now it's our four characters and who they are and what they're good at. And the only character who is actively progressing the plot and using his skills to good benefit is Spike. Because as frustrated as I'm a stereotype, he is genuinely charming. Both to the audience and also to other characters in the show, right? He just walks in the situation and just starts lying like crazy. And everyone's like, oh, you're so sweet. Yes, I'll give you all this information you want. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, your charisma score must be through the roof. This is straight up like, I want to seduce the ogre. No, you can't. Roll natural 20. Oh, God damn it. All right.
Yeah. But we get the exposition about the windows actually open, and then we get attacked.
Right. And it's funny, like, at the time I was a little annoyed at Sherlock. We talk about this, but at the time in Enola Holmes, I was a little annoyed because like the mystery's a bit thin, but I was like, it's for kids. And then watching this, it's like, oh God, Enola Holmes' mystery was positively intricate compared to this because it's the we found the window was open and there's a raven feather. Gee, I wonder what happened. Oh, look, it's ravens.
Just because someone turned their weekly game into a television series, Eddie, is no reason to be upset. Because you've got like your 5 characters, all from different backgrounds, that all their friends came over, they made up their characters, and you've got one person running the game, and this is their weekly game. Next week will be their weekly game.
I mean, if that were true, I could only assume at that table the players were just. All right, there's a bird feather here and the window's open. Man, I have no idea what's going on. It's like, really? Make a roll. Oh, you failed to roll. Fine, Ravens attack. Do you think it might be Ravens? Jesus Christ, yes, it's Ravens.
And so earlier I made a joke about Cthulhu, but I think if they're playing this game at their weekly game, I think this is a hunter game.
Maybe.
Just saying.
And then Watson acts slightly shady again. But in a way that this time around is a little more obvious is okay, something else going on. Because it's pretty clear we're supposed to initially go, B assumes Watson's just being an asshole. But because we know who Watson is as a character, no, there has to be a larger thing at here, and he's desperate for information. That's why he's pushing so hard. And he's just not being socially adroit enough to move it through. But that runs into my biggest problem for me is that if you want to have a socially awkward character who wants to push stuff through, we have one of those. His name is fucking Sherlock Holmes.
But you can't have it be Sherlock because Sherlock would have figured this out already.
Right. So it's you have written yourself into a problem, and the solution is make Watson. This isn't reimagined Watson. This is the diametric opposite of Watson right now.
Yes. And the thing is, they couldn't call it Bee's Bunch and have it be their horror show.
Right.
They need a good name, and the Irregulars is a good name.
Right. And again, I said, I actually priced Watson pretty highly is because they get through this, but this. So I'm chalking a lot of this up to pilot. It's we haven't quite figured out what we want to do with the character yet.
Yeah.
But from Watson's perspective, this is a really rough pilot.
Yeah. And so it's still enjoyable. The horror of the kid without their eyes though was over the top for where I was with the show when I was
Yeah.
watching, because I've only seen all this once now. I didn't have a pre-watch like you, and it was like, all right. And I was like, all right, now I know the show that we're watching
Right.
with the plucked out eyes. Before I had an idea and I was getting there, but that cemented it, so I wasn't surprised by anything else that happened in the next two episodes.
No, but I'm curious. Were you thinking up to that point it was, oh, this is basically tonally Enola Holmes but horror?
I don't know if I'd say Enola Holmes. Something along those lines. Like, I knew even from where we were watching it, it was going to be, I was thinking more like a 12 to 13-year-old tween show.
Okay.
If I was looking for an age range. Like Enola Holmes, I would show at like 13 and under. Sorry, Enola Holmes, I'd show at like 9 plus, equivalently for that.
So actually,
This, I would not show for a kid unless they were 13 or older. And 13
so
is a little iffy depending on the kid.
right. So to go back to Herbert's point, something that you Buffy the Vampire Slayer is like, you're expecting it to be something in that range, and then it kind of got a little darker than that.
Yeah, darker even than Angel because they're more graphic.
Right.
It's the graphic nature of it that ups the age range, not so much the content itself.
Right, which I think is part of the tonal disconnect for me, at least. Anything else about this?
Nah.
All right.
Babies.
Babies.
I Leo can say the one positive thing, at least they're not space babies. Please go ahead.
Leo, having snuck out of the palace to find space babies, with the intention of seeing Bee again, manages to find the duck and quiver. He introduces himself to Bee, who is reading the documents about the missing babies. She explains the investigation to him. Leo notices that all the missing babies were born the same day in the same hospital and suggests they check the birth registry at the town hall to prevent another kidnapping. They discover 6 babies were born that day. With 4 already kidnapped and 1 having died at birth, they only have 1 baby left to check on. Leo suggests that someone might be controlling the birds. Bee and her friends go to confront the kidnapper. Jessie asks to come, but Bee flatly refuses and expresses concern for Jessie's health. She angrily leaves with Spike. Bee gives Billy a decoy baby, and he climbs into the room to place it in the crib. However, when he is distracted by trying to prevent the mother from entering, a raven flies in and captures the infant. The teens
now we know what
chase
you
the
think of
raven.
kids.
Yeah, bugs. The teens chase the raven, which delivers the baby to a hooded man. Billy confronts him about the kidnapping, but the man claims the baby is his. When Billy moves to grab it, the man releases a swarm of birds from beneath his cloak and disappears. Bee, realizing the man is looking for his lost child, that connects to the 6th baby that died in the hospital. She reviews the birth register and learns the mysterious man is Arthur Hilton, the head ornithologist of the London Zoo. So...
Oh, I love every part of that. And I shouldn't, but I do.
Right. And so the tone shifts again, right? Because like now we're back to Leo is trying to find Bee and then finds her and is awkward about it, which is fine. You know, I don't know how to talk to girls / human beings. And she's like, what? You know, which is fine. And then Leo's like, hey, they're all born the same day. How did Bee not notice that?
Because, well, we can go back to point out the educational system that Leopold would have had versus what Bee would have learned.
Well, and that's it.
And
the thing's like, okay,
Leopold's has a fresh set of eyes that would have given him possibly more of sort of an analytical bent than what any of the other kids would have had.
The fresh set of eyes is how I interpreted it the second time around. And you're right. Leopold's role from after this scene is to be the educated kid who has more in-depth classical knowledge. And that is played pretty well in subsequent scenes. But this scene, the very first scene they're in, the very first thing he does to help really undercuts Bee as an investigator. And I get your point, right? The second time around watching it, I could see more the vibe of her reading it going, I'm staring through this stuff. And he just, oh, have you noticed this? But it's not clear, especially because the show is so good about clubbing you over the head about stuff, right? And so now it chooses to be subtle here, and it's just like, ugh.
I go back to what they would have learned and how Leopold would have been trained to look for key things in documentation. Like that would stand out compared to Bee that wouldn't have had that basic training to look for these key things to being important.
Right. And
so
again,
she's trying to go through all the information. He's looking for specific pieces.
That's fair. And I'm totally fine with him going, oh, by the way, you can go to town hall to the birth registry, because there's no reason these kids would ever go to town hall for anything.
Nope.
They have no clue there's a birth registry. What the hell's a birth registry? Why would you document someone's birth? That makes no sense. So, I mean, like, that part is fine to me. It just bugged me because it was very clear they're trying to set up B as the investigator, and so far her investigation had included to accidentally walking into the problem to find the solution and having some rich kid tell her the solution. And then B refuses Jesse to come along, which again is fine. I like the fact that there's tension between these kids and they have things that they're disagreeing with. And the fact that Spike's like, come on, I'll take you back home, and totally not completely ignore what B just told you to do.
See, you're envisioning the scene differently. It starts off with Spike being afraid to carry on, which I don't like already. Like, that is undercut.
That's true. I did skip over that part. Yeah.
And they're like, well, then if you're too afraid, just go home. He's like, all right, I'm out. And that's when you get the Jesse bit. Right. So I didn't like that at all. Like, eh. And,
you're right,
and Spike throughout the show continues to be the coward of the group. There's a few other points.
You're not wrong. This second time around, it did feel, some chunks of it did feel a bit more like he's trying to be pragmatic, one of the group. But I agree with you, it is often written as cowardice, which goes back to an earlier point. The show sometimes is trying to introduce subtlety, but because it's not done subtle in anything else, it's undercutting itself frequently, and also they're often either framed badly or ordered badly. Because I feel like Spike's goal is supposed to be the, hey, let's take a minute to think about what we're actually doing here, but it comes across as like, no, thank you, don't want my eyes plucked out with birds, which, valid point.
Did he wear goggles?
You're ticking in the glass. That's what I do.
Outside the box thinking.
Right. But you're right. I did skip over that part. And that bothered me too when I watched it, but I think I was kind of lost in the, what the hell is Jesse's role in this? And it turns out it's to be magic plot sayer. We haven't gotten there yet.
We're about to, though. I'm ready to go on to the more important piece here.
Okay. Well, I do want to briefly point out that the other tonal shift we get into immediately is like, we're going from this creepy, weird bird mystery that I just picked out to Scooby-Doo levels of, obviously it's the head ornithologist at the London Zoo that's controlling the birds in his huge cloak. Because that's where you obviously keep your ravens, is under your cloak.
Did you not play BioShock?
I did play BioShock.
Do you remember one of the best powers in that game is when you get like these birds that you can shoot from yourself?
Yeah.
It did a shit ton of damage. And
it did.
These people watched that, played that video game too. I could go through and list all the things I know these people have done because I've done them too.
Right. But again, I like the fact that B was like, okay, now that I know where to go, I put those pieces together. Cool, great. But again, it's just and again, like, I love the idea of it's the head ornithologist. Like, it's so dumb that I actually love that point. But we again have shifted tones again, and we're only halfway through this episode.
And we're firmly in Scooby-Doo for coming up with the answer to that plot, is what it was.
Okay. So back at the Duck and Quiver, Jesse has another nightmare in which she is grabbed by the throat by a sinister figure. However, the dream dissolves in a swarm of moths, and she finds herself in a small cabin in the bayou. A man in a white linen suit approaches. He says he'd like to help her and reveals he has brought her there himself. Sensing the dream fading, he tells Jessie that the man her friends are looking for recently got strange powers. The man asks her to find out where Hilton got his powers and explains that Jessie can enter his mind by touching his arm. Jessie refuses, but the man explains that accepting her abilities is the only way to stop the nightmares. Jessie wakes up and tells Spike they have to go find the others. B, Leo, and Billy find Hilton's hideout in the Sue's aviary, but are suspicious when they see that no birds are in the structure. They confront Hilton, and B tries to convince him his baby is dead. However, he insists that someone swapped out the infant and summons the birds to attack the group. Jessie and Spike arrive and manage to run inside just as B closes the doors. As the birds dive bomb in the windows and attempt to enter, Jessie runs over to touch Hilton. She enters his memories and learns that after her death, the baby was taken to the morgue without Hilton ever getting a chance to see her. Unable to cope with his grief, he blocked the memory and felt under the delusion that his baby had been stolen. She also witnesses Hilton gaining his powers through the use of a spirit board. Overcome with the realization of his actions, Hilton breaks down and releases control over the birds. Billy finds the missing babies upstairs, and Leo runs away. So,
Mystical Black Man. Really?
Mystical Black Man.
In New Orleans, no less.
Yes.
That's all I gotta say about that.
I saw that, and I saw it the first time, and I was just like, please don't go where I think this is going to go. And then I don't know, because I haven't watched any further. I don't know if it goes that way. But certainly it was an inauspicious moment.
I am going to say, though, Eddie, as I have only seen like the first 10 minutes of episode 4, I'm very much getting White Guardian vibes from that guy. That's a Doctor Who reference.
Yeah, now I just say that, I am also seeing that. I was wondering why it felt familiar for other reasons. Yeah, now I just say that, yeah.
It could be like the fucking chair they should have get, the white suit. I think he might have like a mint julep over there, kind of how that actor did.
He's got a mint julep somewhere.
So I very much have those feelings for that character right now.
Right.
I'm not even going to talk about any more about the Mystical Black Man stuff. I'm gonna note as a footnote. Less than amused, but I don't know enough of what they do, and I gave it somewhat of a pass because of the diverse cast.
Right. If he was the only black character, it'd be a much bigger problem.
I'd be ranting.
Right.
And we probably would not have talked about the show, actually.
No. But he's the third black character we've met at this point in time. So, actually, no, sorry, fifth. I forgot a couple of cameos.
Yeah.
So, but I did warn you. Full disclosure, I did take Chris ahead of time. Hey, by the way, I just saw this, just so you're aware. But yeah, it was not.
And
good.
I was like, I've seen other black people in like the trailers and casting. I'm sure that it will not be atrocious, and it's not atrocious.
No, it's just not
irritating. Not atrocious. It's good to get more insight into Jessie and her ever evolving psychic powers.
Yeah, and it's she can touch people and get their memories, which is for an investigative show in Supernatural. That's a pretty straightforward power.
Psychometry is a great power.
Yeah, a way to read people's memories or scenes to get plot information dumped at you. And so it's pretty clear now her role is to basically channel plot.
And I feel like it was a GM running the game. It was like, you guys just aren't going to, you're not a mystery group. Let me give you this power to resolve all the mysteries problems that you have. Boom, done. So we're a horror action game now is what we've transitioned into.
Right. And it's pretty clear when we get to the scene. It's you confront him, she touches him, and just goes, "Oh, here's the answer to the mystery." But and this is what bugs me is the way the man in the splint suit explains things. If you touch someone, you can go into their memories. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's part of it.
That way. But he blocked his memory of his daughter dying. So how did Jessie see it?
Well, just because he blocked it doesn't mean she can't access it. It's like a force field. If I have a force field, I can have a force field. That doesn't mean if there's something strong enough, it can't pierce my force field.
Well, that gets into how you define telepathy, right? Because either you define telepathy as you are going through people's memories as they recall them, or you define telepathy as you go through people's memories as they store them but may not actually be able to access them. And those are
I define it as you read their memories as they actually store them.
Right. And that's not how all fiction defines it.
No. But I've read enough that I think that is how it should work, and that is definitely how it works in this show.
Right. It was just weird that's the big kind of her powers that you do this thing, and then immediately introduce a plot element that makes that revolves around him not having access to the memory that's the very thing she's supposed to be doing, and they deal with it by just giving her the information. So it's like, it's not bad. It's just, again, it's structured badly.
And we also have to remember this is the pilot episode, so they're
Right.
like throwing a lot out and like
Yeah.
we've got 50 minutes. Go.
Yeah. Honestly, I wonder if this is a movie that got cut down too. Maybe it's a movie script that got cut down.
Maybe that'd been better. You had more time for stuff to breathe and actually adding extra content. The most amazing part is not the psychic powers or abilities or his control of the ravens. It is the fact that Leopold did not get hurt at all during this. There was no like scratch. There's no bird pack at all. Amazed, I say, because all the birds come in for a while and fly around, and everybody's fine.
Right. That also brings up an interesting point. Is when I first watched this, I was like, "Wow, Leopold's illness is incredibly ill-defined. It is vague hemophilia, but also other things." And to the show's credit, next episode I'm about to talk to does actually address this point, kind of. But you're right. It's like you have interesting where everyone's getting cut up, and the only thing you know about Leopold is he bleeds, and that's the one person who doesn't get cut up, and so it makes him look suspicious.
We're not even going to talk about Leopold's moment with much like Watson from the Christopher Plummer movie, where Leopold almost had a moment with a working girl and gets tossed out into the street and is unharmed by that physical toss.
Yeah.
I thought that was we were going to get something happen to him when he was like hurled out into the street and hit solidly, maybe a bone, something, nothing.
Right.
So,
which again, like if you want to have an action mystery, that's fine, but don't introduce a character who, by being in the action, by definition, should stop existing as a character.
Yeah. That's my biggest problem with the entire thing and the magic around Leopold. That's it. I got nothing else.
Literally, his class protects him from injury.
Let's point it does.
Anyway, so really wrap it up. B returns to 221B to collect her payments. Finding the door open, she enters to see the sounds of a fight and see Watson getting up from the floor as someone jumps out a back window. The doctor pays her and he tells her that all the babies returned to their homes and that Arthur Hilton has been committed to Bedlam. B demands the doctor tell the truth about why he needs their help, and he reveals something dark has come to London. He will need Jesse's powers to stop it. So this is what we talked about before, where we understand Watson was lying before, and he's a little more sympathetic now. But it is also frustrating that he literally has to get his ass kicked before we trust him.
And no big spoiler, but that's instantly going to be gone next episode. They forgot that he was more sympathetic.
Yes.
But what I would love to point out, though, is that this Holmes character is very consistent in his parkour. That's it.
Okay. Anything else about this episode before we go on to chapter 2?
No, we got a lot of episodes, and I think we're running long on this of all shows. Can you believe that?
Right. Well, there's lots to complain about. I mean, no, it's not the target. I keep saying I do like the show. But all right, let's go through. Chapter 2, The Ghost of 221B. Still short of money, B is arrested for stealing a bracelet and jailed, where she is visited by the doctor. Despite B having decided not to work for him again, she is forced to agree to help him when he threatens to have her sent to the workhouse until she investigates another case. The doctor informs her of 2 bizarre recent incidents in which all of a child's teeth were stolen out of their mouths by someone who the press have dubbed the Tooth Fairy. He provides her with the victims' addresses and tells her that a ghostly woman was seen at both locations. B tells him that Jesse thinks people are getting strange powers from somewhere, and again asks how her employer knew about Jesse's abilities. However, the doctor refuses to answer either question. Back at the Duck and Quiver, B convinces Spike to break into 221B to learn more about the doctor and what he knows. Meanwhile, she and Billy will investigate the crimes. Jesse insists on coming with them as she is the only one with psychic abilities. Billy is upset that they are working for the doctor again, but B maintains that they have no choice because of the workhouse. Meanwhile, Leo has once again managed to escape the palace with the assistance of his sister Louise. He finds the other teens just as they are leaving for the investigation. However, he gets a cold reception. B angrily tells him to help Billy with the interviews before storming off. Across town, a young girl who loses a tooth is shocked when she discovers that instead all of her mother's teeth have been removed. The Tooth Fairy. You're right. Watson becomes more sympathetic and immediately goes, I will send you to the fucking workhouse if you don't work for me.
Yep. Gone instantly. which they let us know there's a little bit of time between last one and this one, but still,
Right.
it's
Yeah. And to be fair, I this is one of the downsides of how we kind of order these is sometimes I forget small details. I had forgotten that he used the workhouse specifically as a threat. I knew he threatened her. I forgot the workhouse threat. So your point is valid about there is some connectivity here because B won't go back there, and now Watson's threatening her. So she reluctantly does it because she doesn't want to go back there. So that arc does actually track. Um.
once again, I would not show this to my kid.
Right. Because again, it's horrible. It's like, fucking people's teeth are being ripped out of their heads. And it's just like, what?
Yeah, it's ugh.
And once again, so Spike is amazing because the P is like, go break into 221B. And he's like, I don't want to, I'm scared. And then just does it. Right. He's written as a coward, but yet every time he's actually in a position told to do a thing, he just does it. There's no debate or conflict. He's just really good at what he does, which is, I think, even more frustrating. He's written as, again, I hedge towards realist, but even then, he doesn't want to engage in the action adventure part of the show.
Yeah,
When he's clearly the best at doing the action adventure part of the show. Because
and
Billy's not, because Billy's too much of a hothead.
And we get another glimpse of Sherlock.
Yes, this time vomiting, which is
great. And feet. Yes. So Quentin Tarantino would be happy. But I got to say, on the whole, I am not loving their interpretation of Sherlock either.
No. We literally don't even see his face. So Leo comes in, and Leo is not welcomed, well, primarily because of Billy. And I believe at this point in time where Billy is accused of being against people of upper class stuff, which he denies, which is a weird moment because it's you just hate anyone who's upper class, and Billy's like, no, I don't. It's like, but the entire show, no one in the upper class has treated you well. Yeah. So not trusting the upper class should be the right answer. Yeah. And yet Billy is chastised for it and defends himself against the accusation. Which I'm wondering is how much that was supposed to be internalized classism.
Yeah.
And how much that was just bad writing. I don't know.
I don't have anything else on that bit other than the loss of teeth is creepy. Like, that is
genuinely creepy, right? I will not think about Tooth Fairy the same way ever again. Okay.
You don't envision Dwayne Johnson in with wings and in a little outfit?
Oh God, I just remember that exists now. Well, that's gonna haunt my nightmares. Anyway. Billy and Leo first visit the theater where one of the victims and her mother are employed. Mrs. Macon explains that her daughter Carla had actually lost her last milk teeth several years ago. The Tooth Fairy had in fact stolen all of Carla's adult teeth. Because that's creepy. Meanwhile, Bee and Jesse investigate the area of the sightings in Balham. I think it's Bedlam. Jesse insists that they split up in spite of Bee's misgivings. Jesse follows a young boy into a dilapidated building, out of which is an old dentist sign. She finds a woman buying something in the yard. Jesse explains she's investigating strange occurrences in the area, and the woman invites her inside. They go upstairs, where the woman knocks Jesse out with her breath. Back on Baker Street, Spike breaks into 221B after the doctor leaves. He finds a letter addressed to John Watson concerning a group called the Golden Dawn. However, he's interrupted by someone entering the building. Spike hides under the bed where the man lays down. The man plays the violin briefly before stopping and vomiting on the floor. Spike manages to leave after the man passes out, passing a strange room filled with occult artifacts on the way out. So that was the scene we referenced earlier.
Oh, so there's so much right here.
Yeah. Stealing adult teeth, creepy. I think we've established that. Jesse. So now we have a scene where Jesse's actually kind of on her own for the first time, really, and she's doing investigating things, not just being plot device. And all of the charm and wit we saw at the very beginning of the first episode is just gone from her. Now she's kind of just generic peril monkey.
Yeah, part of it is most of the characterization from Jesse and Spike are diminished more as the show goes on, as we sort of give B more character arcs to do, more Leopold and a little bit more Billy, but even Billy's isn't better. His is just in opposition to Leopold.
Right.
So it's like we have too many characters and we don't know what to do with them.
Right. And I am all for large casts if they're done well. And what's frustrating is that in the pilot, it looked like we had some really strong characters, but you're right. It's now just, okay, we're literally taking time away from Jesse's character and putting it towards other characters. And that's frustrating.
And for a Doctor Who thing, I love a large TARDIS team, but it doesn't work much like the Fifth Doctor if you don't give them all something to do. Remember, Nissa's entire thing with the Fifth Doctor is frequently to be knocked out or
Yep.
captured, much like
Right.
Tegan. And Jesse seems to be knocked out and captured.
Jessie is kind of the Nissa of the group. Yeah, now that you say that, she's the kind of quiet, kind of prissy, weird girl who just does plot stuff and get captured.
Yeah, literally, even in the you can't deny it because that's all she does.
Yeah. And then we find out that Sherlock is part of some kind of weird occult group, and anybody who has even vaguely knowledgeable about mysticism in the Victorian era, the Golden Dawn, should be raising massive alarm bells like it did for me.
Hey, Eddie, what's the Golden Dawn?
The Order of the Golden Dawn was a group of occultists who gained a disproportionate amount of fame because of their leader, Aleister Crowley, who claimed to be a Satanist, but really just wanted to have sex with people a whole lot and do drugs.
Nothing wrong with that. As
Yeah,
long as
and
they're of
also,
age and willing.
if I remember correctly, Ryder and White were part of the Golden Dawn, which led them to create the tarot that we now know, well, most commonly known tarot cards. So they're weirdly influential, but mostly just a bunch of hedonists.
And once again, I stand by as long as they're of legal age and willing. There's
Sure,
nothing
yeah,
wrong with it. Go
yeah,
forth.
yeah. There are some debate about that point, but we're not here to litigate 150-year-olds' sex practices.
Nope. But we are here to litigate how creepy or not creepy the Tooth Fairy is when we see the real visage of her compared to the one that she projected out in the yard.
Yes, yes. Which again is just there are these. They're not quite shock moments, but there's moments where the whole show just kind of cranks up the horror for like a second and then cranks it back down again.
That's how you supposedly will let younger viewers watch it, but it doesn't work from how graphic like their scenes are, like the eyes being plucked out or all the teeth being removed. That ups the graphics so much that a young kid can't watch this because they'll have nightmares probably for the rest of their life.
Right. And I am, with the caveat that I don't have kids, so take my words for a grain of salt, but like I've always been an advocate that kids can handle a little more horror than parents think they can, but graphic gore is not what I'm thinking of. The idea of eyes being plucked out, the idea of teeth being stolen is itself creepy enough. You don't need to actually show it, frankly. You just need to describe it. And that would have been enough. So I feel like these are almost gratuitous and frankly, to a degree, unnecessary. I'm already creeped out by people having their adult teeth stolen. You don't need to actually show me this stuff.
And I think it's something that we may have mentioned before, but I'm much in line with you. I like horror, but I like the idea of the horror. I don't need gore. There's a difference.
Yep. Right.
And how she knocks out Jesse was pretty amusing. And I like the fact that a lot of their powers, as we're already seeing, are going back to whatever their occupation was they're associated with. So that is a nice touch to go throughout, which once again makes it very Smallville.
Yeah, I mean, it's the now that we realize, oh, okay, this is the shtick. These people are gaining powers because of what they were in life. Okay, cool. Now we're saying this is actually a structure and intent. So it's still a bit silly that the lead ornithologist or ornithopterist can control ravens, but now that we know this is a trend, okay, that's fine. But again, that kind of Scooby-Doo vibe of your occupation determines your power jars, especially in a scene where it's jarring directly against the gore of it. It's just a very weird tonal inconsistency.
I am really curious now, though. What if your job was just middle management? Does that mean that you give people paper cuts?
Yes.
Do you do you get to like possibly trap them in a room where they have to do something for 8 hours a day and can't leave until they like clock out? Is that your superpower? That would suck.
I will point out that one of the versions of Marvel vs. Capcom, you could play Phoenix Wright, who is a lawyer, and so you actually could like kill someone by throwing paperwork at them. So yes, absolutely can.
Just curious. Okay.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. Billy and Leo next visit John Cooper, the father of William's second victim. However, they fail to interview him as Cooper is immediately hostile to Billy due to his lower class background. Billy tries to intimidate Cooper, but it fails when Cooper realizes he was an ex-soldier and bodyguard. Billy storms off. Leo tries to calm him down, but Billy turns on Leo, venting his frustration. The upper class is looking down on him. He accuses Leo of being a dabbler, someone who turns to slumming it with the lower classes after growing bored with a life of privilege. Leo begins to argue, but falls down, revealing an inflamed knee. He asks Billy to keep his illness a secret. In Bellum, Lee notices Jessie is missing and goes searching for her sister. She sees a dentist's sign and enters just in time to stop the tooth fairy from pulling Jessie's teeth. They manage to restrain the woman by tying her to a chair. He finds a spirit board and tries to interrogate the woman about her powers, but the woman is unresponsive. Jessie enters the tooth fairy's mind and sees a memory of her attempting to contact her father through the spirit board as she gains her powers. She also witnesses the woman's discovery of her father's body after his suicide. However, the woman then grabs Jessie and drags her into one of Jessie's own traumatic memories of life in the workhouse. Jessie leaves the Tooth Fairy's mind and tells B that she thinks the woman is trying to get revenge on someone she blames for her father's suicide. I admit, again, I didn't realize that scary scene was supposed to be the workhouse, so actually reading the summary, I'm feeling even more awkward about bringing that up before because there actually is a very clear thread of the workhouse happening here. So
I like the fact that here they give more insight into Jesse's power and how it's just not one way. That was
right.
a very nice touch.
Yes. I do like it when powers come with consequences and costs. Especially
That's
in a
my
horror
favorite
show.
thing. Because there doesn't seem to be an actual like physical drain or anything for her to use it, so she can use it all day. Which I'm also now curious, can she use it on people without powers? Because right now it's always been on people with abilities.
That's true. That's a good point. I am slightly amused by the requirements to always refer to them as spirit boards because Ouija is copywritten and cannot be referenced.
I like the fact that they're using spirit boards because it was all the craze for a good chunk of time, and they're easily accessible. They're a quick way to get people powers, almost like Smallville, where everyone would find meteor rock everywhere. This is supernatural Smallville. I originally made some Buffy thoughts because of the group, but going back and looking at it, it is more and more Smallville as we discuss it.
So what you're saying is spirit boards are basically kryptonite.
Yes, in this show. No, I'm sorry. I'm saying spirit boards are meteor rock because they didn't call it kryptonite.
Meteor rock is not actually kryptonite.
Later, they have kryptonite, which is like a larger chunk of meteor rock that affects Clark compared to the meteor rocks that didn't so much. It's
right.
From when I watched Smallville for this podcast and 80 years ago.
The other thing that annoys me is again, we talked about this before, but Billy, again, he was chastised for being mad about the upper classes, and yet he's absolutely proven right here. He's treated like crap because someone of upper class looked down on him explicitly. And he takes that on Leo, which is a natural reaction.
Eddie, I'm not gonna lie to you. If some bum comes up to my house and starts talking to my kid while I'm standing there, it is not going to go well for said bum. And for this show's equivalent, they're bums on the street. So they're unhoused people living below the duck and quiver, I think, in the sewers almost. And if that person comes up to my kid, I am going to be hostile. Right. That is the parent in me.
Sure, yeah.
And he was dismissive, and it became hostile when Billy tried to get up on him.
Okay, no, that's a fair point. So your argument, which I'm seeing as we're talking through, is that Billy creates this somewhat on his own.
there is not a good outcome to the situation. Because one of the reasons
Sure.
we start, Watson hires them because they can go talk to people that upper class people can't talk to.
Right.
And they're going into upper class, which already creates a barrier. And so then him going to this person's house, and when the guy steps out, he sees his kid, and he thinks he can make an easy connection with the kid, talks to the kid over the guy, which brings out a harsh dismissiveness from a parent, which I totally see. And then Billy sort of rises up like he's going to do something. And he says, "Go ahead, do it, son. I'm like a soldier and an ex bodyguard. Let's see how this works out for you."
Right. Um, and that's fair. So that slightly modifies what I was going to say, but it still brings up the larger concern is that the show clearly had a very specific trajectory that it is now actively working against.
Yes.
Now, I mean, like initially Watson hired them to go places that upper people can't go, right? We do know that's a lie, but the point is his lie does not survive one entire episode because
No,
now he's actively sending them into places where he should be better served to go.
it didn't survive the pilot, how you pointed out that like they're
Right,
going to houses of middle class people and up.
right, right. But the goal is this is supposed to be a critique of class politics, which seemed like everything the first episode was pointing towards. We're now directly undercutting it because Billy seems the only person that has this problem, and him lashing out at Leo while his larger points are valid makes him just look like an asshole because we're generally sympathizing with Leo because Leo's the poor sick kid, which brings up to another problem I have, which is the disability metaphor that's going on here of the poor disabled kid can't defend himself. Please let me hide my disability because I'm ashamed of it. I don't want people to think less of me. And I'm just like, oh, here we fucking go. Especially because it's ill defined. It's just he's just
But
vaguely disabled.
then they undercut the assholeness of Billy by saying that it's because his father was a soldier who didn't come home is why he's in the situation he is, so you go feel bad for him.
Right.
So it's
Right.
like undercut, 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 undercut.
Right. It's like I would like it better if Billy had valid points, but was just so hostile that he ends up kind of reinforcing his own valid points.
Yeah.
That could have been cool. Or I could see the point of them saying, Billy, you have to pick your battles. It's not that you're not wrong. It's just that you can't fight literally everyone. Which the first episode was a possible strong trajectory because it looked like he was literally trying to fight everyone, and having the rest of the team go, okay, put some battles back, a few more battles. Nope, so too many battles. I mean, I could see that also. But you're right. It feels like a lot of this is shifting because well, this would make a cool scene. So let's shift these characters different directions to have a specific moment. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right, it just constantly undercuts both the characters. I think, and frankly, neither Billy nor Leo come out of this any stronger as characters. In fact, they come out slightly weaker as characters.
Yep. Because it's already doing the thing I don't like, which is don't tell anyone about my illness. So you're already creating that conflict that could be resolved with like a 2-minute conversation that'll pop up. Like that's going to probably pop up in episode 7.
Right, right, yep,
That's it. I got nothing else for that. Although I did like seeing the ex like captain slash bodyguard be a black guy. That was nice.
yeah, yeah.
Although
That was nice.
then he was assholish to the white character. So people may not know. I go into another thing about that, but I'm not going to do it because I stand by my parent assertion of that moment.
Sure, no, yeah. All right. Jesse goes to find Leo and Billy, leaving B alone to interrogate the Truth Fairy, which is just a hell of a sentence. The woman tries to convince B that the two of them are the same and insists that if B knew her mother had been killed, she would have acted the same way. Outside, Jesse returns with Leo and Billy. They notice a jawbone apparently growing in the dirt. B joins them just in time to see a clone of Carla Manchin emerge from the dirt and run off with a clone of William Cooper that Jesse saw earlier. B realizes the Tooth Fairy is creating clones from the teeth she stole. The group return upstairs to try and determine the intended victim. B remembers the woman earlier said her father lost everything due to the land under his building, and Leo says that the land belongs to the wealthy Duke of Winchester. He realizes that William Cooper's father, John, must be the Duke's bodyguard, while the Duke will be that same night be sponsoring a gala at a theater where Carla Mention works. They send Billy to go warn the Duke. At the theater, Carla's clone kidnaps her and steals her clothing. The show begins. The clone Carla lets in the clone William, who stabs himself in the leg to distract his father. Back in Bellum, B tries to convince the Tooth Fairy to let go of her quest for revenge on the Duke. However, the woman insists the only way to stop her is to kill her. As the Duke enters the theater and begins to give a speech, the Tooth Fairy possesses Carl's clone. She interrupts the Duke and points a gun at him. She denounces the Duke for raising rents on his land and driving her father to poverty. To prevent his daughter from being saddled with his debts, her father killed himself. As she gives a speech, Bia considers killing the Tooth Fairy to save the Duke, but ultimately decides she can't do it. Billy, meanwhile, arrives at the theater and convinces John Cooper that his injured son is actually a copy. Together, they manage to stop, quote-unquote, Carla from shooting the Duke, and the clone is apprehended. The crowd scatters, and Cooper directs Billy to guard the Duke and his wife and daughter in the dressing room.
I
So,
like the fact that B says the word clone.
yes. And I'm just like, okay. One, now we're sci-fi. Two, I don't think the word cloning existed in that context back in the 19th century.
Oh, I love it. I love
It
it
was
so
just
much.
like, oh, and I mean, again, like, I appreciate the sheer what the fuckitude of it, right? It's you're studying teeth so I could grow new people out of the dirt that this place was found on. Like, okay, that is super fucking creepy and weird,
Oh,
and
I
I'm
love
here
it.
for it. But then the fact, like, oh, they're clones, and it's just like, you're weird. You're trying to connect to the audience so the concept they understand, but it super undercuts the creepiness of the situation you set up.
But you get the great scene of the girl popping up out of the dirt. Oh, that was.
Yes,
Ugh.
that was so good.
There's so much wrong in this episode, but there is so much right that I love it beyond words.
Like,
Oh,
I genuinely love that it's like, hey, we need to distract the guy. Cool. And he just stabs himself in the leg and falls over. And I'm just like, what? That's amazing. Um,
and
but
the
and
extent of her powers, Eddie. I want to the Tooth Fairy's powers. What are the parameters? We had Bird Guy, the first one. All right, he can't make birds. He can control them and call them to him. She can make clones in the dirt. She can breathe out knockout gas, and then she can control the clones at whatever distance they are away from her.
and talk through them.
Like, if I was the ornithopter guy from the first episode, I'd be pissed. Like, I got a C grade power, you got an A grade power.
I mean, clearly, yeah, it's like you got way more experience points than I did to make your character with. That's just not okay.
Oh,
And then like the show seems ramping up. Like, okay, you know what? Certain class of people have been oppressed by the rich, and they're so desperate that they have to resort to stealing people's teeth and making clones, which is a natural response to rent hikes, to try to solve the problem. And then the show just muffles its own politics by basically being like, "Oh, but you can't kill the rich people. That would be bad."
yeah.
And it's just like,
But you can kill the poor oppressed people who did what they could to try to fight back.
right. The show unambiguously sides with the Duke. And I'm just like, why? Why did you make that decision?
I want to point out in the first episode, we had the head of so and so, which is easily a middle to upper class person.
Yep.
Who took out revenge, compared to this, which would be a lower class person who does not get a chance to live and survive and is killed, and is a lower class person that's killed. If we're going to
And I
talk about
feel like,
class, we got to talk about who's going to live, who's going to die, how it happens, and this is them actively killing this person.
right. So at this point, I'm starting to think the show is trying to say class doesn't matter, and that everyone's an asshole top to bottom, which might be what the show's going for, but it had a very tortured way getting here, and it's super unclear. And like I don't always try to find the political meaning inside of every show, right? But this show started off so strongly with a clear stance that you have to look at the show through that lens.
But for this, I agree. You have to, because it's also every part of the show. It is how Watson manipulates him to do things. It is how people interact with him in each episode. So class is integral to its structure.
Right.
And then it says, "Oh, fuck, class is not important."
Right. So it's frustrating because either the people who made this show didn't realize their political implications, which strikes me as mind-bogglingly naive,
More impossible.
or it was so muddled by the studio because they were afraid of what this was saying.
Are you saying it could almost be like a director who gets to make a sequel to their super successful movie that I've still never seen because it's not for me, and has utter control? They don't have to have people come and there's no screenings for it. The studio can't say shit about how the director makes it, and it becomes a big, massive bomb. And then they try to blame all the failure on Lady Gaga. Is that what you're talking about?
I wasn't sure where you were going for a while there, and then when you saw Lady Gaga, it's like, oh, you're talking about the Joker movie, right?
I purposely did it like that, though. Come on,
yes.
You know that.
Yes.
So boom. Yeah.
In my defense, I don't want to watch a movie about an incel getting mad and murdering people and him being the hero. But that's just me.
No, that's why I haven't seen the first one. I haven't seen the second one. I'm just seeing how badly it's doing.
Yep.
And anyway, that they persecuted musicals in the movie, which I already hate because I'm a musical fan. But clearly, you're saying it's Joker 2 is not what we're here to talk about, although I'll make jokes about it all day.
Because it is a joke. Anything else about this? Before
I think we could. No, let's wrap it up. We still got a whole nother episode to get through.
Yeah. Okay. Back at Babylon, the Tooth Fairy angrily reacts to the failed assassination and mocks Bee for thinking that she's more moral than her. However, Jesse notices that the third skull that was earlier in the garden has disappeared. Realizing danger isn't over, they wonder who the third clone is, and when the Tooth Fairy possesses the clone, they're horrified to hear her greet Billy. In the dressing room, the Duke's wife suddenly pulls out a knife and stabs him. Billy attempts to disarm her, but is soon overpowered, and the Duchess goes to stab him in the throat. To save him, Bee is forced to kill the Tooth Fairy, which immediately kills the clones as well. However, Bee is traumatized by her actions. Back at the Duck and Quiver, Leo decides to spend the night in the cellar with his friends to convince them of his intentions. Jesse, meanwhile, has another nightmare about the dark pit, but is once again rescued by the man in the linen suit, just as the masked monster catches her. The man in the suit impresses a moth on Jesse's wrist and tells her she can use it to escape the nightmares. Jesse tells him that she looked into the Tooth Fairy's mind and that it felt like a door had been left open with the power on the other side available to anyone. The man explains that someone will have torn a hole in the barrier between the material and spirit worlds. He warns them that the rip will widen as more people reach into it for power until eventually the barrier collapses, ending the world. Jesse shares this information with the rest of the group, but they realize they first need to find the rip before they can think about how to close it. Spike remembers a strange map of London in 221B. He informs the others the doctor's name is John Watson and shows them the letter from the Golden Dawn. Signing that Watson knows much more than he is telling, they agree to start there. Bee visits the Golden Dawn's headquarters, where she finds Holmes, Mycroft Holmes, waiting for her. So now we get the rest of the plot. I mean, so yes, the core plot is resolved. Turns out there's a third clone. The Duchess tries to kill him. They kill the Tooth Fairy. Let's murder the poor people. Move on.
Yeah.
The show didn't respect the plot, so neither will we. But we now have the big ongoing plot, which is the rip. And to kind of go into episode 3 a bit, the guy from America tells the people in London. Yes.
Given how long we're going to potentially run if we do this, do you want to do what we do on occasions?
Which is
and truncate the next description for chapter 3.
Yeah,
I think chapter 3 is the best episode that we'll cover,
right.
But given time.
Yeah. Okay. We can kind of summarize that real quick. But let me finish my initial thought. The guy from the U.S. is the one who explains what the rip is, right? This is what it is called, the rip. And so she said, you have to tell your friends in London what this is. Great. So she says, here's what the rip is. Cool. We now know what it is. We've explained to it. Gwen. The next episode, everyone knows about the Rip. Literally, people we've never seen before know about the Rip.
Well, they're members of the Golden Dawn, so that is acceptable.
But the way it was presented, it seems like the man in the linen suit was the only person who knew about this, and he's like, "You people in London don't know about this, so I'm explaining it to you now because you don't know."
You know what?
I'm
Let's go to episode 3 before we get too much of the Rip. I am going to say one more thing. Right now, I haven't seen any more. I like the fact that the man in the linen suit is not using voodoo or hoodoo and is not any sort of nod, hopefully, to any of those gods or power players associated with that.
agreed. That is definitely a point in the show's favor.
All right. Season 3. So then we can talk about the Rip and everything else. And
okay. So yeah, so short version, because you're right, we're running long. Again, I'm super surprised you're taking this long, but I have a lot to say. Basically, B meets with Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft reveals that Sherlock is Watson's partner and that they've been trying to get Watson to introduce B's group to him because he wants to investigate the murder of the leader of the Golden Dawn. Yeah, he feels like someone murdered Richard Wynne, and he wants to figure out who it is. And so he needs someone from outside the group to investigate, and he wants to use Jesse's power specifically to try to uncover that. So a lot of the episode is very much a kind of almost Agatha Christie style murder mystery. Everyone has a strong reason for doing it. Eventually, over time, different suspects end up murdered in a variety of intricate ways that reflect different cards of the tarot. Until eventually it is revealed that one of them quickly
the actress.
I'm not trying to remember what the character's name is. Patricia, I believe, is the one. She's the one who's actually doing all the murdering because she's trying to use Jesse to channel the energy of the Rip into her to give her undefined magical power. So she has the ability to get people to. She casts a spell to get people to love her. So Jesse to love her and give up her life in love for her. Jesse touches a pole, so lightning will strike, killing Jesse, releasing her power so that she can absorb it. And Spike uses the power of love to convince Jesse to let go of the thing before the lightning strikes. And Mycroft reveals that he's actually the head of secret departments by the British government to investigate the supernatural. He was just infiltrating the Golden Dawn. And originally but there was a joke, but the Golden Dawn is actually really onto something. And so he enlisted Sherlock to investigate supernatural things, which drove Sherlock mad. And so Watson is trying to keep things going, but Mycroft blames Watson for driving Sherlock this way. And there's also a love triangle between Billy and Leo and B, but then Billy gives up on that and starts dating somebody else, and B's mad about that. And then in the middle of nowhere, they get Holmes's grimoire, and there's an A reference in the grimoire, and they find out that A actually was Holmes's assistant in his magical simp, and it turns out the A is actually Alice, who is B's mother, and that's where he ends the episode.
It's a lot of plot, isn't it?
It is.
It's like a Doctor Who episode. Quite
and
literally
right.
like a Doctor Who episode.
And you're right in the fact that this is actually the best episode.
Yeah.
I did not get this far in my first watch. I stopped after the second episode. So this is the first time episode watching it. I was like, oh, this show is actually pretty good. Now that's finally getting somewhere, because this is the show. This is the episode that's the most tonally consistent out of the 3 we've watched.
And it goes back and supports my own personal belief that you should give every single show 3 episodes, because it takes 3 episodes for it to find its footing.
Yeah.
Now, after it looks like it's found its footing, and that will determine how it feel about it going forward. Like, for all I know, episode 5 could totally drop the ball and be a skunk, but here it feels good.
Yeah, because this is the first time that the show's going, oh, actually, maybe we should do mysteries in our mystery show. That might be cool.
Yeah.
And so there's a genuine mystery here. B and Jesse are central to how the mystery is resolved. Why they are needed to investigate actually makes sense, although admittedly Mycroft has to explain it. Although, again, Mycroft is actually the first character to actually explain what the fuck is going on in this show, frankly.
I
So,
love the fact that all of them, when put into a real mystery, are rubbish investigators. I love it
yes, yes. I
because
love,
that's
yeah.
how it should work. You just don't know mysteries, and I gotta figure shit out. Oh,
And I like the fact that Jesse and B are thrown into a high class situation. And of course, there's the awkwardness. They don't understand high class stuff, but it's not done at their expense. It's a little more like this shit makes no sense. And you
yeah.
realize it doesn't make sense because this club is crazy, right? So it's not just class stuff. It's also these people are nuts. Um, and I really
And
love that.
do you also think you might have liked it because this is the closest representation to a Holmes character that is truish to the literature?
Yes, Mycroft. I can see the literary Mycroft in this character. It's a very different take, obviously, but I could see the argument of his highly placed government's position is just I have to investigate the supernatural.
And the fact that like you have all that Mycroft stuff, but it reinforces that Mycroft is a joke. His division and whatever he works with is a joke, which is why he had to bring in Sherlock, which potentially broke Sherlock, but also his division is still a joke, but he understands how dangerous all this is. So I want to go back to that because he has been reporting about the rift and everything else, but all of his superiors are like, that doesn't exist. That's nonsense. Which is how there can be all the magic stuff. And some people know, and a lot of people know, but they don't take it as real. Much like the Force in Star Wars. Everyone knows it's there, but the Force isn't real.
So your assertion, to go back to the original point, because you want to get into this episode first, is that the man in the linen suit is not that the Rip is secret knowledge he only possessed, but rather he's trying to say, listen, other people tried to convince people the Rip's existence. They're not listening, so hopefully you'll listen. You need to spread this information because nobody else is listening. So you think that's the tone or the tenor of it?
Yes. If
Okay,
if he's a benevolent force, and yes, if it turns out that he's going to be like a bad guy or an antagonist, he's doing it then so more people know about it to access it to make things come faster.
right.
So it could go either way, which is why I like the grayness of that.
No, that's fair. Um, and I mean, even Spike and Billy and Leo have some good moments in this episode with the whole mystery box thing.
And
Uh, um,
Leo's going to be a spellcaster by the end of the series.
oh yeah, definitely. He's gonna fling a spell because he's already got no constitution. So I mean, and a high intelligence score, he's definitely got to be a wizard at some point.
Oh, do you know who the wizard he now reminds you of with you saying that?
Raceland.
Yep. Because he's even got like weirdly blue clear eyes. Now, Wrestling, I think, had like golden hourglass eyes, but his eyes are very distinctive.
Right.
Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and like I do like it, it's small here because frankly the show's finally realized you need to focus on certain characters per episode. So this is primarily a B and Jessica episode. But I do like the fact that Billy and Spike are starting to understand what show they're in here. It's like, okay, so weird supernatural shit is just what our lives now. And even not quite meta commentary on a show, but almost up to it. You know, it's not quite Buffy in sense of postmodern. We're
Yeah.
jokingly commenting on the show, but they're walking up to that line of like, is it odd that this is all happening at once kind of thing, you know?
This is the episode, though, that makes it utterly apparent what this show is. It's like a pulp horror action show where they literally freeze time and they try to run away from the house. The house keeps popping up wherever they go. There's no way to
Yes.
deny it for anybody there. Over the top, and I love it. And
And,
how
and
powerful is she to cast a spell like that?
I also love when they're trying to escape, and you know they realize that every direction they walk in brings them back to the house, and they have I don't know if it's an homage, but I feel like it must be of the Scooby Doo thing of like where you walk into one door and pop out another door thing. They kept like leaving the frame at one area, coming in frame a different way.
Oh,
It's like the cheapest, but also the most it's a very clear saving of money, but also it's a little funny, but it's a little creepy, which is I think the perfect tone for the show. But then, like, also, like you said, they also have, like, here's a dude who's been dismembered hanging upside down. So it's like the gore is also still very much present.
Oh, so I love this episode. I enjoy
Yeah,
first episode I was iffy on. Second episode I liked chunks of it. This is an episode I wholeheartedly liked.
yeah.
And I
And
started episode 4 and I'm liking what I'm seeing, but episode 4 also goes back to Jesse being a plot moving device because she touches somebody and you get instant plot. So that's all
right.
I'm gonna tell you.
Yeah. Again, like this is the point where Jesse's actually a character again for a while, and you're seeing sparks of what you saw in episode 1. It's like, okay, I like this because they're actually giving Jesse some time to breathe. Um, so I like that, uh, and I like the fact that the reason why Sherlock is the way he is because he saw too much. But this goes into my point I made earlier about Sherlock Holmes and Cthulhu stuff. I don't know if we did this on the air. I know you and I've had this conversation on the
We
Discord,
did.
and we haven't air. Okay. Um, uh, that Sherlock Holmes either needs to, and if you match him up with Cthulhu, he either needs to be completely on board with it, or he needs to be reduced out of the story. And this show has taken the latter path. It's like, and not only do they reduce him out of story, they reduce him out of the entire show on some level. So props for that. That is one of the two only actual end cases of this kind of situation.
I bet he
Um,
shows up later though.
like he's got to. He's got to at some point in time. They're building up because they keep referencing him and nothing. It's like he's not gone. He's still in the background. He's going to come back. And they're continuing to muddle how much Watson is a villain and how much is a hero. Uh, but this is the first time where that muddying is actually intriguing as opposed to just inconsistent to me.
Yeah.
Because Mycroft's
And
Mycroft explains logically, I brought Sherlock in, he investigated these things, and Watson's the reason like that way. That's an out of nowhere comment. And so it's like, okay, so is Watson inadvertently or advertently involved with this? And also it reframes the I have to keep an eye on Sherlock thing. It may not be entirely out of benevolence. Maybe Sherlock needs to be kept there for some reason. Maybe he's keeping him trapped in 221B.
right now, as a mythos writer with a capital M, I love this in what happened to Sherlock interpretation of it. Because
Mm-hmm.
Sherlock is a brilliant character and obsessive would go and investigate. And the mythos goes back to the more knowledge you have, the more it sort of breaks you as a person.
Right.
And so it's effectively, to our knowledge, broken Sherlock, but it could have also given Sherlock insights that make him see things or understand how connections correlate that don't make sense to us as people. And Watson is teetering on that same edge, but as Watson's character is not obsessive as Sherlock, would not have done as much as Sherlock would have done, which is why he's still sort of a focal point to the rest of the world.
Right.
So I love that right now. Episode 5 or 6, I may not like what they decide to do
Yeah,
with it, but yes,
and I
as a
agree.
mythos writer, yes.
And I'm generally on board with the if you mix, it's not exactly Cthulhu mythos, but if you mix horrible supernatural shit with Sherlock Holmes, one of them has to win. And in the answer, this is supernatural shit has won. I'm okay with that premise because again, I argue that's one of my own. And having this in the context of a very fast-paced Agatha Christie mystery, right? This is an entire Agatha Christie style novel crammed into an episode with other stuff happening on top of it. So there's some ropiness around the actual mystery itself. And again, it's tonally like it's written like an Agatha Christie kid, a mystery that kids could understand, but the visuals do not match up with that structure.
Nope.
So the total inconsistencies still remain, but it is settled into this is just what the show is. The show is young adult but super gory. And that's for whatever reason the show has chosen that direction. And here it is solidified that is what it's doing, and if it's going to do that, it's doing that really well. But it's such a weird direction to take.
I think if it had got the second season and it stayed like this, it would have found that tone that it needed to be consistent.
Yeah, yeah.
So that brings me to my closing thoughts on the entire thing. I stand by. It is highly watchable. You need to get through the first episode, though. The first
Yeah,
episode is definitely a roadblock, just from how much stuff they're trying to throw at you and the constant shifts of inconsistency. But it is thoroughly watchable. The cast looks like they're having fun. There
yeah,
isn't anyone that I hate, which says a lot. Although Billy is teeters on that edge of being a very unlikable character, but then you even get like the self-sacrifice from him, who goes and references like B sacrificing herself by killing the Tooth Fairy for him, and
yeah.
then he sacrifices his own his one relationship with her because Leopold makes her laugh, which he said was important. So you get a
And
little character growth, like
right, yeah. And I will, because we skipped over so fast. I will kind of say we did gloss over. Um, Billy is currently struggling with the Leo and I both want to date B, but also I promised Leo that I would keep his secret safe. And so my solution to that is I will just step out of the triangle. So Billy is starting to develop a sense of honor and morality, which is appreciated. So yeah, characters are all growing at this point. Sadly, exception of Spike, but Spike's
yeah.
just super competent. Like again, in this episode too, he's like, "We need to go find this box." Cool, I found this box, and I figured out the puzzle box, and I just opened it. It's just like, Spike, you're way too competent to be in the show. That's the problem. You're too good.
So yeah, and I would recommend people watch it. Like that is my final entire thought of the entire Regulars.
I think I'm with you in the sense that I would watch it if you're willing to commit to 3 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I bounced pretty hard after episode 2. I pushed through to 3 episodes this time around, and I'm glad I did. And I definitely appreciate the show a lot better now. I probably will at some point in time finish it. But it's definitely a show that you have to know going in what you're going to watch, I think, to appreciate what it's trying to do.
So if this is a teaser for you, it could push you either way, but Lestrade shows up in episode 4.
Now I'm even more interested in seeing what you do with
See?
Strahd.
And I like the premise of what they've started with episode 4. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but Lestrade is in episode 4 and looks like to have a meaty role.
Okay, that's a strong incentive.
Yeah. I got
So,
nothing to say about it. The Irregulars, I'm glad we decided to do it. I'm glad it wraps up our Sherlock run. There is not going to be any Sherlock going forward unless we just make weird references to it.
so what are we going to do going forward, Chris?
We're moving into a genre previously unexplored. We briefly touched on it. We're starting our own sword and sorcery run. Part of it was when I crafted a lot of the season of a lot of stuff that I have not seen, and I don't think Eddie's seen it. And
No.
one of the things I wanted to set though is I wanted it to be definitely more sword and sorcery, sort of medievalish, and to not be Earth. I'm not going to say that some of these places aren't later retconned to be Earth, but they're not called Earth in it because there's so much fantasy, so many different directions. I think I made 6 different lists, and this is the one that we stuck with because it starts in the 90s and it sort of moves up to modern day. There's 10 episodes, maybe less. But next time you can expect Conan the Adventurer 1997, the live action version, not like the 1995 animated one. So live action 97, and it'll be something. I haven't seen the first episode. I haven't seen any of it. I don't think
Oh, you're
Eddie, for the fantasy stuff, I don't think I've seen the first one, the second one. I may have seen the third one.
I've seen some of these, so yeah.
All right. I've seen the third one. I have not seen the first 2. So totally don't know what to expect. As a
It'll be
caveat, think about it. It's fantasy. There's going to be a lot of isms we'll discuss early on.
right, and I guess we'll just cover those when we get there. But yeah. So which episodes we're going to cover for Conan?
What if I don't want to give that much detail? We're going to cover season 1, episode 6, the Ruby Fruit Forest. Season 1, episode 14, Red Sonja. Season 1, episode 17, the Crystal Arrow. And since it was Conan, I skipped the 2-parter opening movie, and I'll give you a quick synopsis of who Conan is if you don't know who Conan is.
Oh yeah, we're going there.
Look how excited you are.
Because I've already watched it.
Did you watch these episodes? Or did you watch the 2-hour
No,
opening movie?
I watched the first 2 of these episodes. I
Eddie is
have.
giggling. Eddie's
Yes,
giddy, so this is gonna be
yes,
bad.
it's gonna
All
be
right.
awful. So cool. We will talk about that next week. But until then, happy Halloween. And
Hey, Eddie.
you know where to find us. You know where to find us. We'll...
Eddie.
Yes.
My last question for you before we get into this, because we're running super long. What are you doing for Halloween?
What am I doing for Halloween?
Yeah.
I don't know yet. I actually don't know what I'm doing yet. We may try to find a Halloween market around here in London and hang out there. We'll see.
Cool. Taking my kid trick or treating, and I'll be dressed like Pike this year. For anyone that's curious, Pike
Nice.
as Captain, not Pike in the chair.
Yeah, yeah, of course. The best Pike. So happy Halloween. Enjoy your holiday wherever you are, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.